Have you ever wondered what happens when someone vanishes without a trace? Imagine a father's desperate search after his daughter disappears during a simple morning swim. For 5 long years, he refuses to give up hope while everyone else tells him to move on. Then, one day, something mysterious washes up on shore that changes everything. This is the story of a father's unbreakable determination, a daughter's survival, and the shocking truth hidden beneath the dark waters. The morning mist hovered over Lake Vermilion like a blanket of secrets. Ethan Lawson checked his watch, 5:30 a.m., as he sipped from his thermos of black coffee. The ID'd sun wasn't up yet, but his daughter Mira had been awake for an hour already, stretching and preparing for her morning swim. "You sure about this, kiddo?" "Visibility's not great this morning." Ethan squinted across the water. 17-year-old Mira Lawson, with her athletic frame and determined eyes, pulled her bright yellow swim cap over her dark curls. "Dad, Olympic trials are in 8 weeks. Coach Parker says I need to practice in all conditions." Ethan knew better than to argue. Mira had broken 3 national records in the 1,500-meter freestyle this year alone. Her dedication was the reason USA Swimming had their eyes on her for the upcoming Olympics. "Just stay within the buoy markers," he said. The words so routine, they'd become a morning prayer. "I'll be right here." Mira flashed him that confident smile, the one that made her look so much like her mother, and gave a thumbs up. 2 miles out, 2 miles back. Same as always. She waded into the water, her wetsuit a sleek shadow against the silver-gray lake. Ethan watched her form perfect strokes, cutting through the water with practiced ease. Even in the mist, that yellow cap was easy to track, bobbing rhythmically with each stroke. His phone rang. "Coach Parker." "Morning, Coach. How's our star today?" Parker's voice crackled through the speaker. "Just started her morning 4-miler," Ethan replied, his eyes still on the yellow cap, now smaller as Mira swam farther out. "Listen, I've been looking at her split times from yesterday. We need to adjust her breathing pattern on the final 500. She's losing precious seconds." Ethan turned slightly, shielding the phone from the wind coming off the lake. "She mentioned that. Said she felt like she was hitting a wall at the 1,200-meter mark. We'll work on it this afternoon. The Olympic Selection Committee is coming next week. They're especially interested in—" A gust of wind sprayed water onto Ethan's face. He wiped his eyes, turning back toward the lake. "Sorry, Parker. Just a sec." He scanned the surface, looking for the yellow cap. It wasn't there. "Mira!" he called out, though he knew she was too far to hear. The mist seemed thicker now, or maybe it was just his sudden panic clouding his vision. "Parker, I gotta call you back." He hung up without waiting for a response. Ethan moved closer to the water's edge, eyes frantically searching. The yellow cap had been there just 30 seconds ago. Maybe she dived deeper for a moment? Sometimes she practiced holding her breath. "Mira!" His voice boomed across the water, sending ripples through the silence of the early morning. Nothing. He stripped off his jacket and shoes, wading into the cold water. The sensible part of his brain, the former Coast Guard rescue swimmer part, told him not to panic. Swimmers sometimes veered off course. The mist was playing tricks with visibility, but the father in him was already drowning in fear. 10 minutes later, he was in his boat, cutting through the lake in widening circles from where he'd last seen her. 20 minutes after that, he'd called 911. By noon, 3 patrol boats, a helicopter, and dozens of volunteers were searching the waters and shoreline of Lake Vermilion. "She's a strong swimmer, Ethan. Best I've ever coached," Parker said, his usual confidence faltering as they stood on the dock beside Sheriff Reed. "Maybe she swam to another part of the shore, but Ethan knew better. Mira would never worry him like that. Not his responsible, level-headed daughter. Sheriff Reed placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We've got dive teams coming in from the county. If she's in this lake, we'll find her. If..." The word cut through Ethan like ice. Clara arrived from her shift at the hospital, her face ashen. "Tell me this isn't happening," she whispered, collapsing into Ethan's arms. "Not our Mira." The search stretched into evening, then into the eye-based darkness of night, the lake illuminated by spotlights, and the desperate hope of a community that had watched Mira grow from a pig-tailed girl into an Olympic hopeful. 3 days later, a yellow swim cap washed ashore 2 miles from where Mira had entered the water. It was torn slightly at the edge. It was the only trace of Mira Lawson they would find. The official report would eventually read, "Presumed drowning," but no one could explain how one of the strongest swimmers in the country had vanished without a struggle, without a sound, beneath the surface of Lake Vermilion. And Ethan Lawson, standing at the water's edge long after the search teams had packed up and the sympathetic casseroles had filled their freezer, made a silent vow to the darkening waters. "I will find you, Mira, whatever it takes." 6 months later, Ethan Lawson sat in the empty kitchen of a house that no longer felt like home. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. Outside, winter had gripped Lake Vermilion, turning its waters to ice and burying Mira's favorite swimming dock under snow. The manila folder in front of him contained a single piece of paper, the final report from the sheriff's department. Case status: inactive. 3 words that felt like a betrayal. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. It was nearly noon, but Ethan hadn't changed out of the clothes he'd slept in, if he'd slept at all. The dark circles under his eyes had become permanent fixtures on his weathered face. Pilot, Mira's golden retriever, nudged his hand with a wet nose. The dog still went to Mira's bedroom door every morning, waiting patiently for her to emerge for their run. "I know, buddy," Ethan whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I miss her too." The sound of a car crunching over snow in the driveway made both man and dog look up. Clara's silver sedan pulled up, and Ethan watched his wife step out, carrying a small suitcase. When she came through the door, the silence between them spoke volumes. "Your sister's okay with this?" Ethan finally asked, already knowing the answer. Clara nodded, setting her keys on the counter with a finality that made his stomach clench. "Diane says I can stay as long as I need." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "The school in Rochester has a counseling position open. It would be a fresh start." Ethan felt the weight of her words. A fresh start. Something he couldn't imagine. "You're giving up," he said, the words barely audible. Clara's face crumpled. "I'm trying to survive, Ethan. I can't keep walking past her room, expecting her to be there. I can't keep watching you destroy yourself looking for our daughter," he finished, his voice hollow. "She's gone." Clara's words hung in the air between them. "The police have stopped looking. The volunteers have stopped coming. Everyone except you has accepted what happened." Ethan stood up, pushing the chair back with enough force that Pilot startled. "They never found her body, Clara." His voice cracked. "How can I accept anything when I don't know what happened to her?" Clara wiped a tear from her cheek. "I've packed some of your things," she said, nodding toward a box by the door. "For the cabin." The cabin, a small property on the opposite shore of Lake Vermilion that they'd bought years ago as a family retreat. In recent weeks, Ethan had been spending more time there, scanning the lake with equipment he'd purchased from his retirement savings. So that's it? 21 years of marriage? And you're just done? Clara crossed the kitchen and placed her hand on his unshaven cheek. I'm not done with us, Ethan. I'm just done watching us drown alongside our daughter's memory. Her voice softened. Take some time. Figure out what you need to do to find peace. But don't forget that you're still alive. 3 hours later, Ethan stood on the porch of the small cabin, Pilot at his feet and a box of belongings in his arms. The lake stretched out before him, its icy surface reflecting the gray winter sky. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Sheriff Reed. Just checking in, Ethan, the sheriff said when he answered. Clara mentioned you'd be at the cabin for a while. I quit my job, Ethan replied, his breath clouding in the cold air. Engineering firm wasn't too happy, but they understood. A pause on the line. Ethan, what exactly are you planning to do out there? What no one else is willing to do anymore, Damon? Find my daughter. After hanging up, Ethan stepped inside the cabin. It was cold and musty from disuse. In the corner sat the sonar equipment he'd been teaching himself to use, far more sophisticated than anything the local search teams had employed. He unfolded a map of Lake Vermilion on the kitchen table, his finger tracing the area where Mira had disappeared. There were sections of the lake that went down over 100 feet, places that the initial search might have missed. On the wall, he pinned up a photo of Mira in her USA swimming team jacket, her smile bright with promise, medals gleaming around her neck. Below it, he taped the torn yellow swim cap, the only piece of her they'd found. As darkness fell, Ethan stood at the window, watching the frozen lake. To anyone else, he might have looked like a broken man, consumed by grief and denial. But in his eyes burned something else: determination, purpose. They think I'm crazy, he whispered to Pilot, who pressed against his leg. But I can feel it, boy. She's out there somewhere. Outside, snow began to fall on Lake Vermilion, covering its secrets under a blanket of white. But Ethan Lawson would be waiting when the spring thaw came. Waiting, watching, and searching for a daughter that everyone else had given up for dead. 3 years later, Ethan's beard was streaked with gray, his once athletic frame now leaner, hardened by physical labor rather than exercise. The locals had taken to calling him the searching man, some with pity, others with a mix of respect and concern. "Morning, Mr. Lawson," called Tessa from behind the counter of the general store. "Got that special battery you ordered?" Ethan nodded, placing his usual supplies on the counter: coffee, canned soup, dog food for an aging pilot. "Thanks, Tessa. The regular sonar one died mid-scan yesterday." Tessa rang up his items, her eyes carefully avoiding the wall calendar behind her that marked the 3-year anniversary of Mira's disappearance next week. "Jim caught some nice walleye off the North Point yesterday. Said there's a school of them moving through." Ethan managed a small smile. People often told him about fish movements now, knowing he monitored the lake daily. "I'll keep an eye out." What he didn't say was that he'd mapped every fish school, every underwater ridge and depression of Lake Vermilion. He knew the lake better than anyone now, better than even the old-timers who'd fished it for 50 years. Back at the cabin, Ethan unloaded his supplies. The small space had transformed over the years. One wall was covered in maps, lake depth charts marked with his own notations. Another held underwater photos captured by the small ROV he'd built himself after teaching himself robotics from library books. The shelves held jars of lake debris he'd collected, pieces of old fishing lures, waterlogged wood, fragments of boats, anything that seemed out of place. Each jar was meticulously labeled with coordinates and the date found. Pilot, now slower with whitening muzzle, watched from his bed near the wood stove as Ethan installed the new battery in his sonar equipment. "We'll head out earlier tomorrow, boy," Ethan said, as if the dog understood his obsession. "There's that section near Eagle Island I want to check again." The phone rang, one of the few modern conveniences Ethan still maintained. Sheriff Reed, right on his weekly schedule. "Ethan," the sheriff's voice sounded tired, "just checking in. You need anything?" This had become their routine. Reed calling under the pretense of checking in, really making sure Ethan hadn't completely lost his grip on reality. "I'm fine, Damon. Getting ready for another scan tomorrow." A pause. "It's been 3 years, Ethan." Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm aware of how long it's been. Clara called me yesterday," Reed continued carefully. "She's worried about you." "Clara left. She doesn't get to worry anymore." The sheriff sighed. "She's filing the papers, Ethan, for the declaration of death in absentia. She needs to move on, and legally, she can file whatever she wants." Ethan cut him off. "Won't make it true." After hanging up, Ethan sat at his makeshift desk, opening his logbook. 3 years of daily entries, 3 years of methodical searching, documenting every inch of the lake. 3 years, and still nothing. The wind picked up outside, rattling the cabin windows. A spring storm was moving in, the kind that would churn up the lake bottom and possibly reveal new areas to search. Every storm brought a small hope. He looked at the photo of Mira on the wall, the one taken just 2 weeks before she vanished. Her Olympic trials swimsuit, her confident smile. Beside it hung her framed national records certificate and the torn yellow swim cap, now faded. A knock at the door startled both Ethan and Pilot. Visitors were rare these days. Sheriff Reed stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable. "Thought I'd stop by in person. Didn't seem right, saying what I need to say over the phone." Ethan let him in, offering coffee out of habit rather than hospitality. Reed sat heavily at the small kitchen table. "The county's putting together a memorial for Mira and the others we've lost to the lake over the years. A plaque near the public beach." Ethan's jaw tightened. "My daughter isn't lost to the lake." "Ethan," Reed said gently, "I was there. I led that search. We had every resource, every expert. Sometimes, even the strongest swimmers don't," Ethan warned. "Don't finish that sentence in my house." Reed looked around at the maps, the jars, the equipment. "This isn't healthy, my friend. Even if—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Even if there was something to find, do you really think you'll find it this way?" Ethan walked to his desk and pulled out a folder. "Last week, I found this." He showed Reed a sonar image. "There's something here that doesn't match any of the geological surveys of the lake." Reed studied the grainy image. "Probably just debris, Ethan." "Or maybe it's where she is," Ethan insisted. "Maybe it's where the answer is." The sheriff stood, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "The memorial service is next Saturday. Clara will be there. Your friends will be there." He moved toward the door. "You should be there too." After Reed left, Ethan sat in silence, Pilot's head heavy on his knee. Outside, the storm arrived, rain battering the cabin. In his head, he could hear Mira's laugh, could see her slice through the water with perfect form. "They think I've lost my mind, Pilot," he whispered, scratching the old dog's ears. "But they don't understand. A father knows. A father feels it when his child is still out there." He turned to the wall of maps, to the mysterious sonar reading he'd shown Reed. Tomorrow, storm or not, he would search that spot again. And the next day, and the day after that. Because somewhere beneath the dark waters of Lake Vermilion lay The truth about what had happened 3 years ago on that misty morning. And Ethan Lawson would not rest until he found it. 1 year later, on the exact day marking 4 years since Mira's disappearance, Ethan steered his boat through the early ADE morning mist. The scene was eerily similar to that fateful day. The same low-hanging fog, the same stillness broken only by water lapping against the hull. "Not today, old friend," Ethan said, as Pilot whined from his spot at the bow. The dog had become his silent companion on these daily journeys. Though now at 12 years old, Pilot moved with the stiffness of advanced age. Ethan checked his equipment. The advanced sonar system he'd invested in 6 months ago, depleting what remained of his savings. This one had better resolution, could detect smaller anomalies in the lake bed. He'd avoided the memorial service the previous year, ignoring Clara's texts and Sheriff Reed's concerned calls. Instead, he'd been here on the water, scanning an area he'd already covered dozens of times. Today, he was trying something different. The eastern section of the lake, with its underwater rock formations, had always produced strange readings. Most local divers avoided it, citing unpredictable currents. But something about this area had been calling to Ethan recently. "Let's see what we can find," he murmured, lowering the sonar device into the water. For 3 hours, he made systematic passes over the area, watching the screen for anything unusual. As noon approached, the mist burned away, revealing a perfect blue sky, the kind of day Mira had loved for swimming. Ethan was about to call it quits when the sonar emitted a sharp ping. He frowned, adjusting the settings and circling back. There, it was again, an irregular reading from the lake floor, about 70 feet down. "What the hell?" he muttered, staring at the screen. The sonar was picking up what appeared to be an underwater structure. Not the typical rock formation, but something with angles too precise to be natural. According to his maps, this area should have been a relatively flat silt bed. Ethan marked the coordinates and continued scanning. As the image built up on his screen, his heart began to race. It looked like a series of tunnels or caves, a network extending horizontally into an unmapped section of the lake. "This isn't on any geological survey," he said to Pilot, who'd raised his head at his master's excited tone. "Not on a single map." Ethan reached for his diving gear, the wetsuit, tanks, and regulator he kept on board for just such discoveries. He'd become a competent diver over the years, necessity forcing him to master yet another skill in his search for Mira. The water was cold, despite the summer sun. Ethan descended slowly, following the line he'd dropped to mark the spot. Visibility wasn't great, about 15 feet at most. At 60 feet, the water temperature dropped sharply, and he felt the first tug of the currents the local divers had warned about. Then he saw it. A dark opening in the lake bed, like the mouth of a small cave. But before he could get closer, a sudden current caught him, pushing him sideways with unexpected force. He fought against it, but the pressure was too strong, threatening to tear his mask away. Reluctantly, Ethan ascended, frustration burning in his chest. Back on the boat, he stripped off his gear and studied the sonar readings again. There was, no doubt, he'd found something significant. That evening, he spread his findings on Sheriff Reed's desk. An underwater cave system? Reed looked skeptical. In Vermilion, the geological surveys would have picked that up years ago. "Well, they didn't," Ethan insisted. "Look at these readings. This isn't natural lakebed formation." Reed rubbed his face. "Even if you're right, what's this got to do with Mira? You think she... What? Swam into a cave system no one knew existed?" Ethan couldn't explain the connection, just the burning certainty that this discovery mattered. "I need better equipment to explore it." The currents are too strong for a solo diver. The county's not going to fund a dive expedition based on this, Ethan. Reed's voice was gentle but firm. Not after 4 years. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing outside the small office of Horizon Geological Services, a new business that had opened in town 6 months earlier. The sign on the door read, Dr. Layla Chen, Marine Geologist. He hesitated, clutching his folder of sonar readings. Coming here felt like admitting he needed help, something he'd avoided for 4 years. The door opened before he could knock, and a woman nearly collided with him. She was in her early 40s, with short black hair and intelligent eyes behind rectangular glasses. "Sorry," she said, stepping back. "Can I help you?" "Dr. Chen?" Ethan asked. When she nodded, he continued, "I'm Ethan Lawson. I've found something in Lake Vermilion that I think you should see." Something in his tone must have conveyed his urgency, because she ushered him inside without question. Her office was small, but organized, with lake charts similar to his own pinned to the walls. "You're the father of the swimmer who disappeared," she said, as he laid out his findings. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "But that's not why I'm here. I've found what appears to be an unmapped cave system in the eastern section of the lake." Dr. Chen studied his sonar readings with professional interest. "This is unusual," she admitted. "I've been mapping Vermilion's geological features since I arrived, and nothing in the historical data suggests caves in this area. I tried to dive to it yesterday, but the currents were too strong." She looked up at him, and Ethan saw no pity in her eyes, only scientific curiosity. "Mr. Lawson, what exactly are you hoping to find down there?" The question caught him off guard. For 4 years, people had tiptoed around his search, either humoring him or gently suggesting he needed to move on. No one had directly asked him what he was searching for anymore, as if the answer were too painful to acknowledge. "The truth," he said simply. "Whatever it is." Dr. Chen nodded, as if his answer satisfied her. "I have better diving equipment than what you're likely using, and I've studied underwater cave systems in the Great Lakes region." She handed him back his readings. "I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to take a look." For the first time in 4 years, Ethan felt something like hope. Not the desperate hope that had fueled his solitary search, but something steadier. Someone else could see what he saw. Someone else thought it mattered. "When can we start?" he asked. Dr. Chen checked her calendar. "I have a survey project to finish this week. How about next Monday?" "Monday's good," Ethan said, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. As he left her office, he glanced back to see her already examining maps of the lake, her face intent with professional focus, not pitying the crazy man who couldn't let go of his daughter, but treating his discovery as something legitimate. That night, sitting on his dock as sunset painted the lake orange and gold, Ethan felt the weight of 4 years pressing down on him. But for the first time, he wasn't carrying that weight entirely alone. "Something's down there, Mira," he whispered to the waters, "and I'm going to find out what it is." The following Monday arrived with agonizing slowness. Ethan spent the weekend, gathering his equipment and reviewing his notes, sleep evading him as anticipation built. When Dr. Chen's sleek SUV pulled up outside his cabin, he was already waiting on the porch, gear packed. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson," she called, lowering her window. Her vehicle was loaded with diving equipment far more sophisticated than his own. Twin tanks, a specialized underwater light system, and what looked like a small submersible camera. "Call me Ethan," he said, loading his gear into her vehicle. "And thanks again for doing this." Dr. Chen, who had insisted he call her Layla, nodded professionally. Your discovery could be significant from a purely geological perspective. Lake Vermilion isn't known for cave systems. They launched from Ethan's dock in his boat, pilot watching forlornly from shore, now too old for these expeditions. As they motored toward the coordinates, Layla studied his maps. "You've been thorough," she commented, tracing his meticulously marked search patterns. "Most people would have given up years ago." "Most people aren't looking for their daughter," Ethan said simply. Layla's expression remained neutral. "I researched Mira's case after you left my office. She was quite the athlete. Olympic-bound, they said. She would have made it too," Ethan replied, his throat tightening. "Fastest 1,500-meter time in her age group nationally. Coach said she had the lungs of a dolphin." "That's why you can't accept the drowning theory. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. Mira could hold her breath for over 3 minutes. She'd trained specifically for underwater endurance." He adjusted their course slightly. "And she would never have gone out beyond the buoy markers. She was disciplined, careful." They reached the coordinates, and Ethan cut the engine. The lake was calm today, the water clear enough to see about 20 feet down. "I'll go first," Layla said, already fitting her tank. "I want to assess the currents before we both go in." Ethan wanted to protest but recognized the logic. He helped her gear up, then watched as she slipped into the water with practiced ease. Her red tank was visible for about 30 feet as she descended, then disappeared in the depths. 15 minutes later, the longest 15 minutes of Ethan's life since the day Mira vanished. Bubbles appeared at the surface, followed by Layla's head. "You were right," she said, as he helped her back aboard. "There's definitely a cave entrance down there. The current gets strong about 10 feet away from it, some kind of underwater pressure differential. But I think we can manage it together, with the right approach." Hope surged in Ethan's chest. "What did you see inside?" "I couldn't enter, not alone. But I dropped a light, and it illuminated a passage extending horizontally." She pulled off her hood, running fingers through her short hair. "We'll need to be careful. Cave diving is dangerous, even for experienced divers." 30 minutes later, they descended together, moving slowly through the increasingly cold water. At 65 feet, Ethan could make out the dark opening of the cave. He felt the current strengthen, pushing sideways across their path. Layla signaled him to follow her lead. She approached the cave entrance from below, using the current to slide upward toward the opening. Ethan mimicked her movement, fighting the instinct to swim directly against the flow. Once inside the cave mouth, the current weakened. Layla's powerful light revealed a tunnel about 15 feet wide, its walls smooth from centuries of water erosion. They swam forward cautiously, staying close to the bottom where the current was weakest. The tunnel extended about 50 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Layla swept her light across the space, revealing more tunnel openings branching. Off in different directions, Ethan checked his oxygen gauge. They had enough for another 15 minutes of exploration before needing to turn back. He pointed to the largest tunnel, and Layla nodded. They swam another 30 feet when Layla suddenly stopped, pointing her light at the tunnel wall. Ethan moved closer, squinting through his mask. There, scratched into the rock surface, was what appeared to be an arrow, crude but unmistakable, pointing deeper into the tunnel. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was no natural formation. Someone had made this mark. Someone had been here. Layla looked at him, her eyes wide behind her mask. She gestured to his oxygen gauge, then toward the surface. A clear message that they needed to return. Every instinct in Ethan's body screamed to continue following the arrow. But training and common sense prevailed. Cave diving was no place for recklessness. Back on the boat, They shed their gear in silence, both processing what they'd found. "That arrow," Ethan finally said, his voice unsteady. "Someone made that." Layla nodded, wrapping a towel around her shoulders. "It's definitely man-made. Recent, too. Not enough mineral buildup to suggest it's old. Could it be Mira's?" The question burst from him, carrying 4 years of suppressed hope. "I can't say," Layla replied carefully. "But it's evidence that someone was in that cave system not too long ago." They made plans for another dive the following day, with extended air supplies and better mapping equipment. As they headed back to shore, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. For the first time in 4 years, he had something concrete. Proof that his instincts hadn't been the desperate delusions everyone thought. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with Layla. Maps spread between them as they charted the tunnel. System based on their initial exploration. "If the main tunnel continues in this direction," Layla said, drawing a line on the map, "it could potentially connect to this section of the lake." "That's over 2 miles away," Ethan said, studying the map. "Could someone swim that far underwater?" "Not without equipment." Layla leaned back, rubbing her eyes. "But there could be air pockets within the system. Natural chambers above the waterline." As they worked, Ethan found himself watching Layla. Her methodical approach, her lack of judgment about his 4-year search. She treated the mystery of Mira's disappearance as a puzzle to be solved, not a tragedy to tiptoe around. "Why are you really helping me?" he asked suddenly. "Most people think I'm just a grieving father who can't let go." Layla looked up, her expression thoughtful. "I studied underwater caves in Mexico for my doctorate. A local teenager vanished while swimming in a cenote. Everyone assumed he drowned." She traced the cave marking on their map. 3 months later, they found him alive in a previously unmapped air chamber. He'd been swept in by a current and found a pocket of air. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced Ethan's chest. "You think that's possible here? After 4 years?" "I'm not saying that's what happened to Mira," Layla cautioned, "but I do believe in exploring all possibilities before accepting the obvious explanation." For 3 days, they mapped more of the cave system, discovering 2 more arrows scratched into the rock walls, all pointing deeper into the network. But the further tunnels proved challenging. Tighter spaces, stronger currents, and depths that required special gas mixtures they didn't have. "We need better equipment," Layla admitted after their 4th dive, "and possibly more people. This is becoming beyond what 2 divers can safely explore." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "Sheriff Reed won't help. He thinks I'm chasing ghosts. I have colleagues at the university who specialize in cave diving. I could reach out." A sudden crack of thunder interrupted her. They looked up to see dark clouds gathering over the lake, the wind already churning the surface into whitecaps. "Storm's coming," Ethan said, his disappointment palpable. "Forecast says it's a big one. We won't be able to dive for at least a week." Layla packed up her equipment as raindrops began to fall. "Use the time to rest, Ethan. We've made more progress in 3 days than you made in 4 years. The caves will still be there when the weather clears." But as lightning split the sky and they raced to shore ahead of the deluge, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that time was somehow running out, that the storm was washing away chances he couldn't afford to lose. "Be patient," Layla called over the wind as she hurried to her vehicle. "Sometimes breakthroughs come when we least expect them." She couldn't have known how prophetic those words would prove to be. The storm that hit Lake Vermilion that night was unlike anything the region had seen in decades. For 9 days, relentless rains pounded the area, raising the lake level by nearly 3 feet and making diving impossible. When the skies finally cleared, the water was so murky with stirred-up sediment that visibility was reduced to less than 2 feet. "We need to wait," Layla insisted, when Ethan suggested trying anyway. Going in blind would be suicide. October turned to November, and still the lake didn't clear. As the temperature dropped, Ethan's frustration grew. Each day felt like another lost opportunity. Another day Mira, if she was somehow alive, remained lost. "Winter's coming," Layla reminded him during one of her visits to the cabin. "Ice will form soon. We might need to wait until spring." "I can't wait that long," Ethan said, pacing the small living room where maps and equipment had spilled over every available surface. Pilot watched from his bed, gray muzzle resting on paws, eyes following his master's agitated movements. "Actually," Layla said slowly, studying one of her charts, "winter might be exactly what we need." Ethan stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "Lake currents change seasonally. In summer, the thermocline, where warm surface water meets cold deep water, creates the strongest currents around the cave entrances." She tapped the map. "But in winter, when the lake temperature is more uniform, those currents often weakens significantly." Hope sparked in Ethan's chest. "So we could dive in winter, through a hole in the ice?" "It would be challenging," Layla cautioned. "Cold water diving requires specialized equipment, thermal protection. But yes, theoretically, the Buoy caves might be more accessible." The weeks that followed transformed Ethan's cabin into an operations center. Layla brought in thermal diving suits, special regulators designed for near-freezing water, and underwater communication equipment borrowed from university colleagues who had become intrigued by their discoveries. December arrived with Arctic temperatures that quickly froze the lake's surface. Ethan and Layla identified the optimal spot for their dive, directly above the cave entrance, and spent 2 days cutting through the foot-thick ice to create an access hole. Sheriff Reed paid an unexpected visit as they prepared their equipment beside the ice hole. "Heard you two were planning something," he said, looking dubiously at their extensive gear. "This seems extreme." "We found evidence of human activity in the caves," Ethan explained, too excited to be diplomatic. "Markers, Damon. Someone's been down there." The sheriff's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "And you think that someone could be Mira? After more than 4 years?" "We don't know what we'll find," Layla interjected, her tone professional. "But from a scientific perspective, there could be air pockets in the cave system large enough to sustain life." Reed looked between them, then sighed. "Just be careful. I'm not comfortable with this, but I know better than to try to stop you, Ethan." He handed them a small radio. "Keep this with you. Check in every hour, or I'm sending in emergency services." The morning of the dive dawned clear and bitterly cold, the temperature hovering at 5 degrees below zero. Steam rose from the ice, whole, as the warmer lake water met the frigid air. "Remember the plan," Layla said as they performed final equipment checks. "We follow the main tunnel to the chamber with the first arrow, then take the passage it indicates, no more than 40 minutes at depth. If we get separated, return to the ice hole immediately." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. 4 years, 1 month, and 8 days since Mira had disappeared. Would today finally provide answers? They slipped into the water through the ice hole, the thermal suits protecting them from the worst of the cold. Immediately, Ethan noticed the difference. The water was crystal clear, visibility extending at least 30 feet, and the current that had fought them before was significantly weaker. They descended to 70 feet, easily locating the cave entrance. As Layla had predicted, the powerful current that had made their summer approaches so difficult was now just a gentle flow. Inside the main tunnel, they swam with methodical precision, their powerful lights cutting through the darkness. The chamber with the first arrow appeared just as they'd mapped it. Ethan pointed to the tunnel the arrow indicated, the one they hadn't been able to fully explore before. Layla gave the OK signal, and they proceeded deeper into the underwater labyrinth. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to swim single file. After about 200 feet, it began to slope upward. Ethan checked his depth gauge. They were ascending, now at 60 feet, then 50. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a chamber much larger than any they'd seen before. Ethan's light couldn't reach the far walls. Swimming upward, he realized with a jolt that there was no ceiling of water above them. Their lights broke the surface, illuminating a vast air-filled cavern. They emerged, lifting their masks in astonishment. "An air pocket," Layla breathed, her voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "Just as I thought." Ethan scanned the space with his light. The cavern was about 30 feet across, with a small, rocky shelf on one side that rose above the water level. "Look," Layla said, directing her light toward the shelf. There, scratched into the rock wall beside the shelf, was another arrow, larger than those underwater, pointing to a narrow opening at the back of the cavern. Ethan's hands shook as he pulled himself onto the rocky shelf, removing his fins. The opening was small, but a person could definitely fit through it. Whether it led anywhere was another question. "Ethan!" Layla called, her voice tight with excitement. "There's something else here." She pointed her light at the base of the rock wall. There, half hidden in a crevice, was a small waterproof box, the kind divers used to protect valuables. Ethan knelt, his breath catching in his throat as he carefully opened it. Inside was a small metal object, a diving weight, the kind swimmers used for training. Engraved on its side were the initials, M.L. Mira Lawson. "She was here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She was alive in this chamber." "Ethan," Layla said gently, "we don't know when this was left. It could have been—" "I know my daughter's equipment," he interrupted, turning the weight in his trembling hands. "This was custom-made. Her coach had them engraved for the Olympic training." He looked up, tears filling his eyes. No one else would have this. No one. Before Layla could respond, a low rumble shook the cavern, sending small rocks tumbling. From the ceiling. "What was that?" Ethan asked, instantly alert. Layla's expression grew concerned. Could be ice shifting on the lake, or— She didn't finish the thought. Another rumble, stronger this time. Water in the cavern sloshed against the rock shelf. "We need to go," Layla said urgently. "Now!" The vibrations could destabilize the cavern. Ethan looked longingly at the tunnel opening. What lay beyond it? Where did it lead? But Layla was right. Safety had to come first. They couldn't help Mira if they became trapped themselves. Reluctantly, he placed the diving weight back in the box and secured it in his gear bag. They redonned their masks and fins and slipped back into the water just as another, stronger tremor shook the cavern. Their return swim was tense, both pushing to their limits as more rumbles echoed through the tunnels. When they finally emerged, through the ice hole they found Sheriff Reed waiting, his face taut with worry. "Thank God," he said as they climbed out. "What was that noise? The ice has been groaning and cracking for the last 10 minutes. "Seismic activity, maybe," Layla suggested, helping Ethan with his heavy tanks. "Or the pressure changes from the recent freeze." That night, a blizzard descended on Lake Vermilion, dropping 2 feet of snow and adding another 6 inches of ice to the lake's surface. When it finally cleared 3 days later, Ethan and Layla returned to their dive site, only to find that the tunnel entrance had collapsed. Sonar confirmed what they feared. The cave system had experienced a significant collapse, the main entrance completely sealed by fallen rock. "There might be other entrances," Layla said, trying to console a devastated Ethan. "We only explored a small section of the system." But Winter's grip tightened, making further exploration impossible. Ethan spent the long, dark days examining the diving weight, the proof that Mira had been alive in that air pocket. But for how long? And where was she now? The answer would come from an unexpected direction, and sooner than he could have imagined. March brought the first signs of spring to Lake Vermilion. Ice began to break up along the shoreline, creating a patchwork of open water and shrinking ice sheets. Ethan watched from his dock each morning, counting the days until they could resume their exploration. Layla had spent the winter months consulting with geology colleagues, developing theories about where other entrances to the cave system might exist. Her visits to the cabin had become regular, her scientific determination matching Ethan's emotional drive. "The university's lending us ground-penetrating radar," she told him one evening as they pored over maps spread across his kitchen table. "Once the ice is completely gone, we can survey these 3 areas." She circled locations on the eastern shore. "If I'm right about the cave's formation, there could be additional openings." Ethan nodded, though his focus had drifted to the small diving weight sitting on the windowsill. Mira's diving weight. He'd spent countless hours studying it, as if the worn metal might somehow speak to him. "Ethan?" Layla's voice brought him back. "Are you listening?" "Sorry," he said, running a hand through his now mostly gray hair. "Just thinking about what we found. That air pocket. Someone could survive there." Layla's expression softened. Yes, they could. For some time at least. She didn't add what they both knew, that some time almost certainly wasn't 4 years. Even with the diving weight as evidence Mira had been there, the odds of her still being alive somewhere in the cave system were vanishingly small. Their planning was interrupted by a fierce spring storm that swept across the lake that night. Thunder rattled the cabin windows, and wind howled through the trees. Pilot, now ancient and nearly deaf, pressed close to Ethan's leg, trembling at the vibrations he could still feel. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The remaining ice had shattered, pushed by wind and waves into jagged piles along the shoreline. Trees had fallen, and the lake's water level had risen dramatically. Ethan stood on his dock, surveying the damage, when he noticed something unusual washed up on his small beach, debris that hadn't been there before. The storm had churned up the lake bottom and driven floating objects to shore. It had become his habit over the years to collect and examine anything unusual that washed up. Most was unremarkable: waterlogged wood, tangled fishing line, the occasional lost piece of boating equipment. But today, half buried in sand and broken reeds, was something different. A buoy, not one of the standard navigation markers used on Lake Vermilion, but a smaller, more technical device. It was about 2 feet in diameter, with a damaged solar panel on top and strange markings on its metal casing. Ethan waded into the cold water to retrieve it, turning the heavy object over in his hands. The casing had been modified, with what appeared to be hand-drilled holes sealed with marine epoxy. Someone had adapted this scientific instrument for some other purpose. He carried it back to the cabin, setting it on his workbench in the small shed behind the house. As he cleaned away the mud and lake growth, he noticed something protruding from a sealed compartment on the underside. The edge of what looked like plastic. Layla arrived just as he was carefully prying open the compartment. "What did you find?" she asked, setting down her bag of survey equipment. "Some kind of research buoy," Ethan said, working a screwdriver into the sealed edge. "Not from around here. Storm must have dislodged it from somewhere." The compartment suddenly popped open, and a small, waterproof pouch fell into Ethan's hand. His heart rate quickened as he carefully unzipped it. Inside was a medal. Not just any medal, but the Olympic qualifier medal Mira had received at her last national competition. Its ribbon was faded, but still showed the distinctive blue and silver pattern. And beneath it, folded tightly, was a small piece of waterproof paper. Ethan's hands shook so badly that Layla gently took the paper from him, carefully unfolding it. "It's coordinates," she said, squinting at the faded numbers. "And initials, ML. Mira Lawson," Ethan whispered, clutching the medal. He knew this piece by heart, had watched with tears of pride as it was placed around Mira's neck just 3 weeks before she disappeared. "The handwriting," he continued, voice breaking. "That's Mira's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere." Layla looked from the coordinates to their lake maps, frowning. "Ethan, these coordinates aren't on Lake Vermilion. They're... Let me check." She pulled out her phone, entering the numbers into a mapping application. Her eyes widened. "They're on Lake Superior, an island chain near the Canadian border." "Lake Superior?" Ethan repeated, confusion mingling with the surge of hope. "That's over 200 miles from here. How would Mira—" "I don't know," Layla admitted. "But this buoy isn't standard Minnesota DNR equipment either. It looks like an oceanographic research device, the kind used for tracking currents in the Great Lakes." Ethan stared at the medal in his palm, the weight of it as familiar as his own. Heartbeat. "She's alive," he said, the words barely audible. "She has to be." Within an hour, they were in Sheriff Reed's office, the buoy and its contents spread on his desk. "I need to trace where this came from," Reed said, examining the device, "and verify the authenticity of, well, all of this." He looked up at Ethan with a mixture of concern and cautious hope. "You understand I have to be thorough, right? This could be a cruel hoax," Ethan finished for him. "Who would do that, Damon? Who even knows about the diving weight we found? Just you, me, and Layla." Reed nodded slowly. "Fair point. Give me a few hours to make some calls. These coordinates, we need to contact authorities up there." But Ethan was already gathering the items, carefully returning them to the waterproof pouch. "I'm going. Today." "Ethan, wait for official channels," Reed urged. "If this is real, and that's a big if, then we need to do this right." "It's been 4 years, Damon. 4 years, 6 months, and 14 days. Ethan's voice was steel. "I'm not waiting anymore." Back at the cabin, he packed quickly. Clothes, emergency supplies, maps, the diving weight from the cave, and now the medal and coordinates from the buoy. Pilot watched from his bed, too old to rise but following his master with rheumy eyes. "Mrs. Jensen will look after you, boy," Ethan told the dog, kneeling to stroke his graying muzzle. "I'll be back soon. With Mira, if there's any justice in this world." When Layla arrived an hour later, her car was packed with scientific equipment. "I'm coming with you," she said before he could speak. "Don't argue." Ethan nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Thank you." As they loaded the last of their gear, Sheriff Reed's cruiser pulled into the driveway. "I figured you'd ignore my advice," he said, getting out with a folder in hand. "But I made those calls anyway." He handed Ethan the folder. That buoy was part of a University of Minnesota research project from 5 years ago. It went missing around the same time Mira disappeared. Ethan opened the folder to find printouts of the buoy's specifications and deployment records. "There's more," Reed continued. "The coordinates you found. They point to a small island with an abandoned lighthouse. Coast Guard says it was decommissioned 15 years ago, but satellite imagery shows recent activity there." "What kind of activity?" Layla asked. "Boats coming and going, lights at night." Reed's expression was grim. "I've requested assistance from authorities up there, but it'll take time to coordinate." "We're not waiting," Ethan said, closing the folder. Reed sighed. "I know. That's why I brought you these." He handed over a satellite phone and a small case. "Keep in touch." "And this?" He opened the case to reveal his personal sidearm. "Because I don't like any of this, and I'd rather you have protection." Ethan stared at the gun, then at his old friend. "You believe me now, that she might be alive." "Let's just say I believe something isn't right," Reed replied. "Be careful, both of you, and call me when you reach those coordinates." As they drove away from Lake Vermilion, Ethan kept the waterproof pouch clutched in his hand. After nearly 5 years of searching the same waters, following the same patterns, he was now heading in an entirely new direction. Whether it led to answers or to Mira remained to be seen. But for the first time since that misty morning, when his daughter vanished, Ethan Lawson had more than just hope and determination to fuel his search. He had proof. The drive to Lake Superior took just over 4 hours, each mile increasing Ethan's restless anticipation. Layla drove while he studied maps of the island chain where the coordinates pointed. A small cluster of rocky outcroppings near the Canadian border, accessible only by boat. "We'll need to rent something seaworthy," Ethan said, looking up from the maps. "Those waters can be rough, even in good weather." Layla nodded, her eyes fixed on the road. "I've arranged for a boat in Grand Marais. College friend owns a marina there." "You thought of everything," Ethan said, grateful once again for her methodical approach. "Not everything," Layla admitted. "I still can't figure out how Mira could have gotten from Lake Vermilion to Lake Superior. The lakes aren't connected by any navigable waterway." Ethan had been asking himself the same question since they'd found the buoy. "Someone must have taken her," he said, voicing the thought that had been haunting him. "But why? Mira wasn't wealthy. We're not wealthy. It wasn't a ransom situation." "Whatever the reason," Layla said carefully, "if she left those coordinates, she's alive. Or at least, she was when she sent that message." The words hung between them, neither willing to speculate further on what they might find at the lighthouse. They reached Grand Marais by early evening, the small harbor town already quiet as tourist season hadn't yet begun. Layla's friend at the marina, a weathered man named Hank, provided them with a sturdy boat and a curious look when they mentioned their destination. "That old lighthouse?" he asked, handing over the keys. "Nothing out there but rocks and gulls. Been abandoned for years." "We're doing a geological survey," Layla explained smoothly. "The university's interested in the underwater formations around the islands." Hank didn't seem convinced, but didn't press further. "Weather report says clear skies through tomorrow. After that, a system's moving in. You'll want to be back before then." They loaded their equipment and set out as the sun began to set, using GPS to navigate toward the coordinates. The vastness of Lake Superior stretched before them, its waters darkening with the fading light. "We should reach the island in about 2 hours, Layla said, checking their course. "It'll be dark by then." "Good," Ethan replied. "Better if we arrive unnoticed." As they traveled, Ethan revealed something he'd never told anyone, not even Sheriff Reed. "Mira was getting strange messages before she disappeared," he said, raising his voice over the engine noise. "Emails mostly, warning her to stop looking where she shouldn't. Layla turned to him surprised. "You never mentioned this before." "I thought they were from jealous competitors," Ethan explained. "Mira was breaking records, getting Olympic attention. I told her to ignore them." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't take it seriously." "Did you tell the police?" "After she vanished? Yes. They checked it out but couldn't trace the emails. Said they were sent through anonymous remailers." He stared out at the darkening water. "I've wondered ever since if I missed something important." Night had fallen completely by the time the small lighthouse came into view, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. No lights shone from its windows, but as they approached, Ethan pointed to a small dock on the leeward side of the island. "Someone's been here recently," he said, noting the newer planks among the weathered wood. They cut the engine 100 yards from shore, using oars to silently approach. The island was small, perhaps 3 acres total, with the lighthouse perched on its highest point. Rocky shores surrounded it on all sides except for a small pebble beach near the dock. "We should wait until morning," Layla whispered as they secured the boat. "Exploring in the dark could be dangerous." But Ethan was already pulling out flashlights. "I didn't come this far to sit in a boat all night," he said, checking Sheriff Reed's pistol before tucking it into his jacket. They made their way up a narrow path from the dock, moving slowly to avoid dislodging loose stones. As they crested the hill, the lighthouse stood before them, a square stone structure about 60 feet tall, with a small keeper's house attached to its base. No lights, no movement, no sound except the waves against the shore and the distant cry of a night bird. Approaching the keeper's house, they found the door secured with a heavy padlock. The windows were boarded from the inside. Ethan circled the structure, looking for another entrance, when Layla called softly from the back. "Over here," she whispered, pointing to a cellar door partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Unlike the main entrance, this door showed signs of recent use. The plants around it trampled, the lock newer than the weathered hasp it secured. Using tools from Layla's equipment, they managed to break the lock with minimal noise. The cellar door opened to reveal a set of stone steps descending into darkness. "Stay behind me," Ethan said, drawing the pistol as he led the way down. The beam of his flashlight revealed a small basement room that had been converted into a makeshift laboratory. Tables lined the walls, covered with scientific equipment, microscopes, specimen containers, and various testing devices. Filing cabinets stood in one corner, and maps similar to Ethan's own were pinned to a corkboard. "What is all this?" Layla whispered, examining a set of water testing equipment. "Look at these," Ethan said, pointing his light at the maps. They showed Lake Vermilion, with the cave system they'd discovered marked in red. Next to it were detailed drawings of what appeared to be underwater structures, not natural formations, but something else. "These look like ruins," Layla said, studying the drawings. "Ancient structures of some kind." Ethan was about to respond when a sound from above froze them both. Footsteps on the lighthouse stairs, then voices. At least 2 people, maybe more. They doused their flashlights, plunging the basement into darkness. Ethan positioned himself near the stairs, pistol ready, while Layla moved behind the filing cabinets. The voices grew louder. Then the door at the top of the cellar stairs opened. Light spilled down from a lantern held by a tall figure whose face remained in shadow. "Should check the equipment before we head back out," the figure was saying to someone behind him. "Dr. Mercer wants those new readings by tomorrow." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Dr. Vance Mercer, a name he hadn't thought about in years. A marine archaeologist who had been conducting research on Lake Vermilion around the time Mira disappeared. They'd met briefly at a community meeting about lake preservation. The figure began descending the stairs, still talking to his companion. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering in his chest. Should he confront them? Try to slip past them? His finger tensed on the trigger. Before he could decide, a third voice called from above. A voice that stopped his heart. "Marcus, bring up the logbook from Cabinet 3 while you're down there. I need to check something." A woman's voice, older, more mature than he remembered, but unmistakable. Mira's voice. The shock nearly made Ethan cry out. Only years of discipline kept him silent as the man called Marcus reached the bottom of the stairs and moved toward the filing cabinets, directly toward where Layla was hiding. Everything happened at once. Marcus spotted Layla's shadow, shouting in alarm. His companion rushed down the stairs. Ethan emerged from his hiding spot, pistol raised. "Don't move!" he commanded, his voice shakier than he'd intended. Marcus froze, hands raised, while the second man stumbled backwards on the stairs. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. "How did you get here?" Before Ethan could answer, hurried footsteps sounded from above, and a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. "What's happening? Marcus? Are you—" The figure stopped mid-sentence, light from the lantern above illuminating her face. Thin, older, with her dark hair cut short instead of in the long ponytail he remembered. But the eyes, those were the same eyes that had looked up at him with determination every morning before her swims. "Mira," Ethan whispered, the pistol lowering involuntarily in his trembling hand. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mira Lawson, 22 years old and 5 years missing, looked directly at her father and said one word: "Run." Before Ethan could process the warning, the building's power cut out, plunging the basement into darkness. Confusion erupted. Shouts from Marcus and his companion, the sound of equipment being knocked over. In the chaos, Ethan felt a hand grasp his arm and pull him toward what he thought was the wall. A panel slid open, a hidden door he hadn't noticed before, and he was yanked through it. "Follow me," Mira whispered, her voice sending shock waves through him. "Stay quiet." "Layla," he managed to say, still stunned by the reality of his daughter, alive and pulling him through the darkness. "Your friend? She came through already. Hurry." They moved through a narrow tunnel, dimly lit by emergency lights embedded in the floor. Behind them, angry voices echoed from the basement. "Check the escape tunnel. They can't have gone far." After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a small natural cave with a metal door at the far end. Layla stood there, looking bewildered, but unharmed. Mira moved quickly, entering a code on a keypad beside the door. "We have about 2 minutes before they override the power shutdown," she said, her voice clipped and efficient. "Once we're outside, head for the north side of the island. There's a boat hidden in a cove there." The door clicked open and cool night air rushed in. Ethan found himself stepping out onto a rocky ledge on the opposite side of the island from where they'd docked. Only then, in the pale moonlight, did he truly see his daughter. Thinner than he remembered, with a scar running along her jawline that hadn't been there before. Her athletic build remained, but there was a hardness to her now, a watchfulness in her eyes that spoke of years spent looking over her shoulder. "Mira," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "It's really you." For a brief moment, her composure cracked. "Dad," she whispered, and he saw the 17-year-old girl beneath the stranger's exterior. She moved as if to embrace him, then caught herself, glancing anxiously back at the lighthouse. "No time. They'll be coming." Who? Who's coming? What? Is all this? The questions he'd been holding for 5 years tumbled out. "I'll explain everything, but not here," Mira said, already moving down a narrow path that wound between boulders. "They'll have the island surrounded soon." Ethan and Layla followed, scrambling over rocks slick with spray from the lake. The moon disappeared behind clouds, making the treacherous path even more dangerous. "There," Mira whispered, pointing to a small inlet nearly invisible from the water. Tucked beneath an overhanging rock was a sleek motorboat, smaller than the one they'd rented but built for speed. "Get in," she ordered, already untying the mooring lines. "Both of you!" As they climbed aboard, a shout came from somewhere above them. Flashlight beams swept the rocks. "They've found the tunnel exit," Mira said, her voice tight. She pushed the boat away from shore and jumped in, starting the engine with practiced efficiency. "Keep down." The boat slid out from the cove, its dark, hull blending with the night waters. Mira kept the running lights off, navigating by memory and the dim illumination of the stars. Only when they were a half-mile from the island did she throttle up, the engine's roar shattering the night's quiet. Ethan watched his daughter's profile as she stood at the helm, her face set with concentration. 5 years. 5 years of searching, hoping, refusing to believe she was gone. And now here she was, guiding a boat through the darkness of Lake Superior as if she'd been doing it all her life. "Where are we going?" Layla asked, breaking the stunned silence. "There's a private dock about 20 miles south," Mira replied, without taking her eyes off the water. "We'll be safe there temporarily." "Safe from what?" "From whom?" Ethan pressed. "Mira, what happened to you? 5 years." "I know how long it's been, Dad." She cut him off, her voice softer now. "I've counted every day." She glanced at him, then back at the water. "I'm sorry. So sorry for what you must have gone through. But I couldn't come home. It wasn't safe." "Because of Dr. Mercer?" Ethan asked, remembering the name he'd heard. Mira's hands tightened on the wheel. "You know about Mercer?" "Only that he was conducting research on Lake Vermilion when you disappeared. And we just heard his name back there." She nodded grimly. "He's the reason for all of this. Him and what I found that morning." Before she could explain further, lights appeared behind them. A larger boat in pursuit, gaining quickly. "They're faster than I thought," Mira muttered. "Hold on." She veered sharply, cutting away from their previous course. The pursuing boat adjusted, its powerful spotlight sweeping across the water toward them. "Who are they?" Layla asked, bracing herself as the boat bounced over the waves. "Mercer's security team," Mira replied. "Ex-military, most of them. Hired to protect his operation and silence anyone who threatens it." "Like you?" Ethan said. Mira's expression darkened. "Like me. Like anyone who discovers what's down there." The pursuing boat was closing the gap. Their spotlight found them, the harsh beam illuminating their small craft. "There's a fog bank ahead," Mira said, pointing to a gray wall of mist in the distance. "If we can reach it, we might lose them." She pushed the engine to its limits, the boat skipping across the water's surface. The distance to the fog bank shrank rapidly, but the larger boat behind them continued to gain. A sharp crack split the air, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Water splashed just feet from their bow. "They're shooting at us," Layla gasped. "Warning shot," Mira said grimly. "Next one won't miss." Ethan reached for the pistol Sheriff Reed had given him, but Mira shook her head. "Won't help. They're too far, and we're moving too fast." They hit the edge of the fog bank, visibility dropping instantly. Mira cut the engine to a low rumble, changing direction in the concealing mist. Behind them, the pursuing boat's spotlight swept back and forth, searching. For 15 tense minutes, they drifted through the fog, Mira making occasional adjustments to their course, while keeping the engine quiet. Eventually, the sound of the other boat faded into the distance. "I think we lost them," she whispered, relief evident in her voice. "For now." She guided them to a small, natural harbor formed by a jutting peninsula. A wooden dock extended into the water, barely visible in the pre-dawn light that was beginning to filter through the fog. As they tied up, an elderly man emerged from a small cabin nearby, shotgun in hand. Upon seeing Mira, he lowered the weapon. "Cutting. It closed this time," he said, his voice gruff but concerned. "Had to, Frank. They found the lighthouse." Mira gestured to Ethan and Layla. "My father and his friend. They need shelter too." Frank's eyebrows rose as he looked at Ethan. "The searching man. She told me about you." He nodded toward the cabin. "Come on. You all look half frozen." Inside the sparse but warm cabin, Frank stoked a wood stove while Mira gathered blankets. Only when they were seated with hot coffee did Ethan finally ask the question burning inside him. "Mira, what happened? That morning on Lake Vermilion?" His daughter looked at him with eyes that had seen too much for her 22 years. "I found something I wasn't supposed to find," she said softly. "Something people have killed to keep secret." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling of the wood stove. Frank busied himself at the small kitchen counter, giving them privacy, while remaining within earshot. "That morning on Lake Vermilion," Mira continued, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, "I was doing my usual route. The visibility was poor because of the mist, but I'd swum it so many times I could have done it blindfolded." Ethan nodded, remembering how he'd watched her yellow cap disappear into the fog. "About a mile out, I noticed something in the water. A shimmer that seemed out of place. I thought maybe it was trash, or fishing equipment someone had lost." She paused, her gaze distant with memory. "I dove down to check. That's when I saw it." "Saw what?" Layla asked gently when Mira didn't continue. "An underwater structure. Not natural rock formations, but clearly artificial. Carved stone, geometric patterns. At first, I thought I'd discovered some kind of Native American artifact, maybe a sacred site that had been flooded when the lake level rose." "In Lake Vermilion?" Ethan frowned. "There's never been any record of such structures." "Exactly," Mira said, "and what I found was older, much older than anything that should have been there." She glanced at Layla. "You're a geologist. You understand what I'm saying?" Layla nodded slowly. "You're suggesting these structures predated known human settlement in this region?" "By thousands of years," Mira confirmed. "I didn't know that then, of course. I just knew I'd found something strange. I was going to surface and tell Dad, but then I saw the divers." "Divers?" Ethan asked. "3 of them, in black wetsuits with specialized equipment. They were photographing the structures, taking measurements. They didn't see me at first. I was behind one of the larger formations." Mira's voice had taken on a detached quality, as if she were reporting events that had happened to someone else. "I should have left immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. I swam closer." She took a shaky breath. "That's when one of them spotted me. I panicked and tried to swim away, but they were faster with their equipment. They grabbed me, dragged me deeper. I fought, but..." Her hand unconsciously touched the scar along her jawline. "I thought I was going to drown. Then one of them pressed something against my face, a breathing apparatus. They pulled me into an underwater cave entrance I hadn't noticed. There was an air pocket inside, a whole chamber. That's where I met Mercer for the first time." "Dr. Vance Mercer," Ethan said, the name bitter on his tongue. "The archaeologist." "Marine archaeologist officially," Mira corrected. "Privately, He believes he's discovered evidence of an advanced pre-Ice Age civilization. The structures I found were just a small part of it. His team had been documenting the site for months before I stumbled onto it. Why the secrecy? Layla asked. A discovery like that would make his career. Because he doesn't want to share. It? Mira said, her expression hardening. The structures contain writing, symbols unlike any known ancient language, and artifacts with unusual properties. Mercer believes they're the key to technologies we can't even comprehend. So he kidnapped you to keep his discovery secret? Ethan's voice shook with renewed anger. At first, yes. They took me to a research facility on the shore of Lake Vermilion. Mercer said they'd release me once they'd secured the site, but days turned into weeks. I realized they never intended to let me go. She looked down at her hands. Then I overheard Mercer talking about eliminating the loose end, me. That night, I managed to escape. I took what evidence I could, photographs, coordinates, notes, but I knew I couldn't go home. They'd look for me there first, and I couldn't risk putting you and Mom in danger. Her eyes filled with tears for the first time. I'm so sorry, Dad. I wanted to tell you I was alive, but it wasn't safe. Where did you go? Ethan asked, his own vision blurring. North, initially. I had a friend from swim team whose family had a hunting cabin near the Canadian border. I stayed there for months, trying to figure out what to do. Mira's voice steadied. Eventually, I made contact with Frank. He used to work in marine archaeology before retiring. He believed my story when no one else would. Frank looked up from the counter. Mercer was always obsessed with fringe theories. When Mira showed me the evidence, I knew he'd crossed a line from ambitious to dangerous. We've been documenting everything, Mira continued. Building a case. The cave in Lake Vermilion was just the beginning. Mercer's operation spans multiple sites across the Great Lakes. The lighthouse is their main research facility now. Why not go to the authorities? Layla asked. We tried, Frank replied. Mercer has powerful connections, government contracts, private security. The few officials who took us seriously either disappeared from the case or suddenly changed their minds. So we decided to gather irrefutable evidence, Mira added. Enough that they couldn't ignore or bury it. We've been infiltrating Mercer's operation for the past 2 years. I've been working as one of his research assistants under a false identity. Ethan struggled to process everything. The diving weight in the cave, the buoy with your medal, and the coordinates. Breadcrumbs, Mira said, with a sad smile. I knew if anyone would keep searching, it would be you, Dad. The cave was my first attempt to leave a message, but it was too risky to leave more. The buoy was my backup plan, set to release after a certain time if I couldn't make direct contact. Otihotranide. Distant sound made Frank move swiftly to the window. Helicopter, he said grimly, coming in low from the east. They've found us, Mira said, standing quickly. We need to move, now. Wait, Ethan protested. We need to call Sheriff Reed. He can help. There's no time, Mira insisted, already gathering items from around the cabin and stuffing them into a waterproof bag. And no guarantee his channels are secure. Mercer has informants everywhere. Frank grabbed a laptop from a hidden compartment under the floorboards. All our evidence is backed up here, he said, handing it to Mira. The server uploads completed. Last night. The helicopter sound grew louder. Through the window, Ethan could see it approaching over the lake, its searchlight sweeping the shoreline. There's a trail through the woods, Frank told them, grabbing his shotgun. Leads to a road about a mile in. My truck is hidden there. Keys under the front seat. You're not coming? Mira asked, concern etching her face. The old man shook his head. I'll buy you time. When she started to protest, he cut her off. I'm too old to run, kid. Get that evidence to someone who can use it. The contact in Duluth, he's still our best bet. Ethan recognized the look that crossed his daughter's face, the same determination he'd seen before her races. She hugged Frank quickly, then turned to Ethan and Layla. "Stay close behind me," she instructed, slinging the bag over her shoulder. The trail isn't obvious. They slipped out the back door as the helicopter circled overhead. The forest was still dark, the pre-dawn light barely penetrating the thick pine canopy. Mira moved with confidence, finding a path that Ethan could barely see. Behind them, the helicopter landed. Shouts echoed across the water. They'd been running for perhaps 10 minutes when the first gunshot cracked through the forest, followed by the deeper boom of Frank's shotgun. Mira faltered for just a moment, then pressed on, her pace quickening. "The truck is just ahead," she said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. They broke through the trees onto a narrow dirt road. A battered pickup truck was hidden beneath pine branches beside it. Ethan helped clear the camouflage, while Mira retrieved the keys. More gunshots sounded in the distance, then silence, more ominous than the noise had been. "Get in!" Mira urged, jumping into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life as Ethan and Layla climbed in beside her. They'd traveled less than a quarter mile when headlights appeared behind them. "They're in vehicles now," Mira said, accelerating on the rough road. "We need to reach the highway." Dawn was breaking as they fishtailed onto the paved highway, tires squealing. Their pursuers were less than 30 seconds behind. "The laptop," Mira said urgently. "In the bag. There's a satellite phone. Call the number saved as insurance." Layla found the phone and dialed while Mira pushed the truck to its limits. Ethan looked back to see two black SUVs gaining on them. "Who are we calling?" he asked, as Layla waited for an answer. "Remember when I said we tried the authorities?" Mira replied, swerving to avoid a pothole. "One person believed us. He's been waiting for the full evidence before moving." Layla suddenly spoke into the phone. "This is Dr. Layla Chen with Mira Lawson. We have the evidence and are being pursued on Highway 61, north of Silver Bay. Yes, he's here too." She handed the phone to Ethan. "He wants to speak with you." Ethan took the phone, bewildered. "Hello? Mr. Lawson?" said a familiar voice. "This is Agent Daniels, FBI. We met briefly during the initial search for your daughter. I need you to keep heading south on 61. Help is coming." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance ahead of them. "They won't get here in time," Mira said, watching the SUVs close the gap in the rearview mirror. "We need to lose them now." She veered suddenly onto a logging road, the truck bouncing violently as she accelerated into the forest. The SUVs followed, their superior suspension handling the rough terrain better than the aging pickup. "There's a bridge ahead," Mira shouted over the engine's roar. "It crosses the river gorge. If we can reach it—" A sharp bang interrupted her, as one of their tires blew out. The truck swerved, Mira fighting for control as they skidded toward the edge of the road. With a sickening lurch, the vehicle slid partially off the embankment, its front end crumpling against a pine tree. "Out!" Mira commanded, already kicking her door open. "The bridge is just through those trees. Run!" They scrambled from the wrecked truck, Mira clutching the precious laptop. Behind them, the SUVs skidded to a halt, men with guns pouring out. "There!" Ethan pointed to a wooden footbridge spanning a deep gorge about 100 yards ahead. On the other side, more sirens were approaching. They ran, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Reaching the bridge, Mira pushed Layla ahead. "Go! Get the evidence across!" Layla hesitated only briefly before sprinting across the swaying bridge with the laptop. Ethan and Mira followed, the wooden planks groaning beneath their feet. They were halfway across when a figure appeared at the opposite end of the bridge, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to authority. Dr. Vance Mercer. In his hand was a gun, aimed directly at them. "Enough running, Mira," he called, his voice carrying over the rush of the river below. "You've been a worthy adversary, but this ends now." Mira pushed Ethan behind her, shielding him with her body. "It's over, Mercer. The evidence is already being transmitted. Even if you kill us, you can't stop it now." "A regrettable waste," Mercer replied, his expression cold. "The discoveries we've made could have changed humanity's understanding of our origins. Now, they'll be tangled in bureaucracy and politics for decades." "You killed people to keep it secret," Mira said, her voice steady despite their precarious position. "That's not advancing knowledge. That's obsession." Mercer's face hardened. "Some sacrifices are necessary for progress." He raised his gun, but before he could fire, the bridge shuddered as Mercer's men began crossing from the other side. The aging structure, never meant to hold so many people, creaked ominously. "Dad," Mira whispered, not taking her eyes off Mercer. "When I say now, jump to the right side of the bridge and hold on to the railing." "What?" "We'll fall. Trust me. I've been planning escape routes for 5 years." The bridge swayed more violently as additional weight was added. A crack split the air. Not a gunshot, but the sound of wood giving way. "Now!" Mira shouted, grabbing Ethan and pulling him sideways. They toppled over the railing just as the center section of the bridge collapsed. Ethan expected to fall into the gorge below, but instead found himself clinging to a rope that Mira had somehow secured. They swung in a controlled arc toward the rocky wall of the gorge as men and broken bridge pieces plummeted into the river below. Mercer, caught on the far side of the collapse, stared in disbelief before turning to flee from the approaching sirens. He didn't make it 3 steps before Layla, who had reached the other side earlier, tackled him from behind, sending his gun spinning away. Minutes later, as FBI agents swarmed the area and a rescue team helped Ethan and Mira from their precarious position on the gorge wall, Ethan finally allowed himself to believe it was over. "You really never gave up," Mira said, as they sat wrapped in emergency blankets, watching Mercer being led away in handcuffs. "Even when everyone else did." "A father knows," Ethan replied simply, echoing the words he'd told pilots so many times over the lonely years. "A father feels it when his child is still out there." Mira leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally overtaking her now that the danger had passed. "I always knew you'd find me," she whispered. "That's why I left the clues. That's why I kept fighting to stay alive." As the rising sun bathed the chaotic scene in golden light, Ethan Lawson held his daughter. No longer the teenage Olympic hopeful who had vanished that misty morning, but a survivor who had fought her way back to him. The yellow swim cap that had washed ashore 5 years ago had been only the beginning of their story, not the end. That was the end of this story. Thank you so much for listening. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from today? If you enjoyed this tale of determination and hope, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more captivating content just like this. Don't forget to share with friends and family who might appreciate it too. Spreading these stories helps foster kindness and awareness in our community. Until next time.